Campaign for Liberty for hosting this event, and I want to thank all of you who happen to have signed the petition, because that had a lot to do with our scheduling. So I am very pleased to be here. It's very nice to see a nice crowd of enthusiasm, which means to me that the revolution has arrived to Mississippi. That we have, and sometimes they're pretty bad, and I won't put a good light on them, except for one thing. I'm convinced that we have the answers. I'm convinced that you as a generation can do something about it, and we don't have to be locked in on this. All we have to do is restore our confidence, freedom, and understanding of what a free society is all about. I am convinced that we can solve our problems. Tonight, though, I want to talk a little bit about what's been going on in Washington. I'm sure you've read about it, you hear about it. And, there's a budget crisis in Washington, and you've heard a little bit about that. But, we're not even on the verge of solving the problem. We have Republicans and Democrats. And Democrats want to spend a lot of money, and Republicans want to spend a lot of money. And they argued over this budget. We had a budgetary vote this week. And the litmus test for conservatives was to vote, for the Republican budget. And the reason we were supposed to vote for it was it was going to cut $6.2 trillion off, cut $6.2 trillion. But they never told you what. That it was off the proposed increases of what Obama promised. But the Democrats, of course, wanted to spend a lot more money. But if you look at it, we find out that if you look at the Obama projections, that in 2016, the national debt would be $20 trillion. Just a few more $1 trillion added on. But if you vote for the conservative Republicans in 2016, you will only have $19 trillion worth of debt. So guess what? I voted no on that. I didn't think it was acceptable. Difficult. I went to Washington the first time. I've been there a couple times. I went to Washington in the 1970s because I was concerned about what would happen to this country after they closed the gold window and we lost the last link to the gold standard. And I thought, boy, the spending is going on and it's going to get much worse. So I went with the deep conviction that what had to be done was to set a standard and just quit spending all this money. So as long as I've been in office, I've never voted for these appropriations. I've never voted for them because I believe that we would come to this point where we would meet a major crisis. And today we have it. In 2008, it was predictable by the Austrian free market economists that we were in the midst of a big bubble. But guess what? Our good friend over at the Federal Reserve, a guy by the name of Bernanke, said, everything is going to be okay. Well, he missed that call, just a bit. And then the bubble burst, and we got into all these problems that we've had these last couple of years. And they claim that they have bailed us out and got us out. They prevented the depression. Everybody was to rush back to Washington if they were out of town to vote for the TARP funds to bail out, Wall Street and the banks and big corporations, or we would have a depression. And I've been challenged by this because obviously I was completely opposed to this. And they said, well, what, don't you care? There would have been a depression. I said, yeah, but the depression would have been for Wall Street, not on the average person who ended up losing their jobs and losing their house. What we need to do is straighten the system out. But I remember during that campaign, I was involved a little bit back in 2008, but after the two main candidates were running, the TARP fund vote came out. And they both felt like it was an absolute emergency to get back to town and register a vote on the TARP funds because they didn't want to seem negligent on something as important. So both of them rushed back to vote for it. And I got to thinking, what in the devil? I thought the party, at least theoretically, during campaign time, is supposed to be different. But that's our problem in this country, that we have a single party system, and we presidents. One is anti-war, and one is pro-war, and one is pro-civil liberties, and the other isn't. One's fiscal conservatives and against big government and the welfare program. But, if you put the Democrats in charge, they're every bit as bad as the Republicans when it comes to spreading wars around the world and violating civil liberties. Most of the regular Republicans, and they come in and say, okay, what we have to do is get our house in order, so we'll first double the size of the Department of Education and introduce Bush Care, which is prescription drug program, and that is to solve the problem. No, our problem is, and I say this seriously, we've had way too much bipartisanship for about 70 years in Washington. The foreign policy doesn't change, the monetary policy doesn't change, the welfare policy doesn't change, the protection of our personal property, that doesn't change. And we need bipartisanship, but we have to get both parties and the people to agree on doing the right thing. To have bipartisanship to do the wrong thing, that won't help us. And that is what I think our job is. This new generation that's coming in and interested in this is to get a consensus of the people, building coalitions left and right and center or wherever to come together on the issues that we agree on. Because then, if we're doing the right thing, we want to bring people together. One of the worst statements made by a president, at least philosophically speaking, on economics was what Nixon said when he, issued wage and price controls, closed the gold window, and put, a tariff on imports. And that was in 1971. He says, but we're all Keynesians now. But I think it's time that we reject that notion that we all have to follow Keynesian economics and start looking at Austrian free market economics. Ideas are what count. The rhetoric doesn't count. We are overseas, and we've been overseas for the wrong reasons. Ever since Woodrow Wilson decided that we had to go around the world to make the world safe for democracy, got us, our country whipped up and got involved in World War I when there was no need to, which then led to a century of killing and war, and our policies haven't changed. So what we need to do is to look at our foreign policy, our monetary policy, our economic policy with a different lens. It isn't like it's a brand new one. Freedom's been around a bit. Unfortunately, we are not doing a very good job of preserving it. Freedom is a relatively new idea. It's become, it was a grand experiment for our country. And we did very well. Never perfect, but pretty well, because we respected property rights and sound money and contract rights. And we did that for a long time, and we had great prosperity. And now what we have done is we have undermined that system, and we are facing a crisis. We don't have to reinvent the whole idea. We certainly can improve on the views that we had before. Even on the gold standard. The gold standard that we had in the 19th century was far from a perfect gold standard. We got in a lot of trouble because we didn't follow the gold standard. So there's a lot of improvement, a lot of refinements. Even when the founders wrote in the Constitution by not giving authority to be the policeman of the world, and then strongly advised us to stay out of entangling alliances, don't get involved in internal affairs of other nations. But it wasn't long after the Constitution was written that we started going away from that. So what we need is to understand how we got into this mess, where the mistakes were made, where are the political problems that we have, and then deciding what is it that we do believe in? What is it that will answer these questions? And very fortunately for us, we don't have to, revamp the Constitution. Sure, we can have some refinements. It can be better. It was never a perfect document. But we at least have a pretty good starting law.